Learner Center Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin. I'm joined today by the one and only Dr. Katie Novak. She is an internationally recognized education consultant, best-selling author of 16 books, and leading expert in universal design for learning, inclusive practices, and multi-tiered systems of support. As the founder and CEO of Novak Educational Consulting, Katie has worked with thousands of schools and organizations across the globe to help create more equitable, accessible, and empowering learning environments for all. She is known for her clear, practical approach, her contagious energy, and her commitment to making high-impact strategies feel doable and inspiring for every educator. She's also an amazing mom, human, and someone I'm so honored to call my friend. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you today.
So the stars have finally aligned. We've been trying to do this podcast forever. I know you're crazy busy, which is amazing that you get to work with so many educators. But I'm really excited to get this started. And I'd love for you just to start off, for those of you who may or may not know you, with some of the key experience that have shaped you into the amazing educator and leader that you are today.
Okay, so we got to go way back for this. It's like I feel like I want to sketch out a timeline on chart paper maybe, but ultimately it started. Yeah, let's do it. My senior year of high school, I had this amazing teacher who took me aside and grilled me for essentially being academically failure to thrive, if you wanted to have a euphemism, but is what are you doing? You are wasting so much talent, and why are you sitting here in these low-level classes, just like a whack-a-mole, you're not doing anything. What's your plan? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just going to be awesome, right? No plan. And she essentially was like, you are brilliant, you are capable, stop wasting everybody's time. Most importantly, stop wasting your own time. You're going in an honors class and you're going to see that you're just as capable as anyone else. And so, the first time I was really, really challenged was my senior year of high school. And so I applied to the University of New Hampshire, which is a state school, and got waitlisted, which is I do well academically now. And so I think people imagine probably I was a very hardworking student, but I was C's and D's, degrees, baby, until I met Mrs. Krause. And it totally changed my life. And so I wanted to be a teacher because I wanted to be like Mrs. Krause, right? And I wanted to be able to create spaces where kids essentially had additional pathways in life because our paths crossed. And I love Mrs. Krause forever for that and wanted to be that person. And so I became a teacher, and I was in the classroom for almost 15 years. Then I went to administration. But while I was a classroom teacher, I was trained in something called universal design for learning, because as a district, we were moving towards much more in inclusionary placements, where a lot of these sub-separate programs were being integrated into general education classrooms. And I had an opportunity to be trained by Dr. David Rose, who is the founder of CAST and created the UDL framework. And people always say, how did you become a consultant? And the answer is totally by accident, because I was a guinea pig in a study on creating more inclusive classrooms. And it was a huge research study. And so researchers would come out and they would videotape and they would interview me. And David Rose essentially saw my classroom and was like, will you present at the Harvard University International UDL Symposium? I was a 7th grade teacher at the time. And he's like, just, present what you learned about UDL and how it changed your classroom and some of the outcomes your kids have had. And I was like, okay, sure. So my first presentation was at Harvard in front of superintendents and school leaders around the world. And I gave a show, right? 7th grade style. We made salsa and I was using all these analogies. And afterwards, people started coming up to me and they're like, hey, can I have a business card? Hey, can you come out in our district? I'm like, to do what? I teach 7th grade. I don't know what you want me to do in your district. I have a job. And that's where it started, where I was like, oh, I guess I'll go, I can go during my summer vacation, or I can go during some school breaks, or I can take some personal days. And I went into administration because I ran out of days, and I realized how much I loved working with teachers. And the administrator schedule gave me a little bit more flexibility to be able to do both of those things, which I did until 2020. And now I'm focused on consulting full time and teaching graduate courses. I work with George Koros, and we teach in a program at Penn on universal design for learning.
I love that. So many things that I think about. First, how amazing it would be to teach with you. I was a seventh grade teacher on the opposite edge of the earth, right? You were in Massachusetts, and I know
Yeah.
you were in California. I was in Hawaii. Like, it would have been so fun to get to teach with you and be able to collaborate, because at the same time I was also getting my master's in universal design for learning and testing it out with my learners. And so it's just really cool to see how you've been able to inspire so many people to really think about how to design more engaging, authentic, inclusive learning experiences.
Yeah. And again, like at the core of everything I do is my teacher's heart. I came at this from a teacher. I still come at this from a teacher. If people ask me what I do for a living, I always say I'm a teacher. And
Same.
then they're
I'm
like,
like a
"Oh,
middle
what
school
grade do you
teacher.
teach?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, now I mostly teach adults." And but like when I think about what I do, it's really like I'm still so involved in like what does it mean to design instruction that empowers, that elevates, like that's the work.
That is the work. And that's so funny. People are like, well, you used to be an educator. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I am an educator, not used to be. I still am. That's exactly what I do every single day.
Yep. Same Z's.
Same Z's. So, okay, so lots of jargon. We talked about universal design for learning a little bit, but we know we've visited many classrooms, being in many school districts, that sometimes the words and the jargon, the acronyms mean different things in different places. They've kind of become different things. So can you just break down, what does UDL, Universal Design for Learning, mean, and why is it important in our education systems today?
So it essentially means that you can design a classroom that would work for any student. So universal is like everyone, and design for learning is how do we design learning so it would work for everyone? And a lot of people will say, I'm already doing UDL.
Mhm.
And UDL cannot be measured in the intention of the designer. It is only universally designed if you could place any student in that class and if they would have the pathways they needed to learn and share what they know. And therefore, I would not say that we have universally designed classrooms and systems. It's a framework for how we approach design, trying to get as close as we can to a space where our learning environments are accessible and flexible enough to really meet the needs of everyone in terms of challenge and support. So a great example of something that is actually universally designed would be an iPhone, in that anyone can have an iPhone, and there's so many accessibility tools. So whether you are blind or whether you are part of the deaf community, regardless of what language you speak, you can make the text bigger, you can make the text smaller, you can decide what go on there. And there's so many things about an iPhone that people don't even realize, they don't even know, because they might not need those tools. But it's essentially designed so that anyone, regardless of how tech savvy they are, or the limitations they have with technology or accessibility, like it is designed so that anyone would be able to use it. It's hands free, there's Siri, there's all of these different ways we can customize it. The way that I often talk about it with educators is to just think about a dinner party,
Hmm.
where if you were going to have a party at your house and you were going to create a dinner, and the goal is, I want anyone to come. So let's say you have like some besties, but some of your besties are dating people who are new. And technically, those people could have some really significant dietary needs that you don't know about. And
Hmm.
it's like, what would you need to do at a party so that everybody could eat? What you would not do is serve like a rare steak, a baked potato fully dressed already with like your sour cream and your cheddar and like red wine. Well, why wouldn't you do that? Is because we know that there are so many people who have a plant-based diet, who live a sober lifestyle, who are lactose intolerant, who are gluten-free. There's so many different barriers to
Hmm.
that meal. Now, there's nothing wrong with that meal. Serve it if you want, but it cannot be the only thing you serve. And
Right.
so, if my goal is for everyone to have a really nice meal, I turn on the grill and I might say, listen, I have some steaks and I have some zucchini, but you're welcome to bring whatever you want for the potluck for the grill. And then we'll do like a baked potato bar, but we're also going to do a salad bar. So, everything that goes on a baked potato, cheese, bacon, like it's also good on lettuce if you want it. And then I'm going to have some coffee, some red wine, some water, BYOB, right? And in that space, like everybody could come and have a pretty decent meal. And so we have to move away from these one size fits all learning experiences where it's like, okay, to learn about characters, you're going to read a hard copy of The Outsiders, and then you're going to write with your hands a 5-paragraph essay in blue or black ink, and it needs to be done in an hour. And I would say, oh, that's not going to work. It's not going to work for kids who don't have foundational reading skills. It's not going to work for kids who don't have the fine motor skills. It's not going to work for kids who might be multilingual, who have significant support needs. And what about the kids who've already read that book and seen the movie? What are they getting out of it? Because they're going to be bored. And a lot of the times we're thinking about it in terms of like, well, kids are different from each other. And it's like, well, I don't have any students who don't have fine motor skills. Okay, but what if the star athlete breaks his wrist tomorrow in a game? Now you do, right? So if it's universally designed, it's choose a text, read or listen to it, share what you've learned about characterization, feel free to write or type or use voice to text, lots of options for brainstorming and feedback. And so you're really designing a space that has firm goals and flexible means so that kids every day can choose what they need based on the context so that they can get as close to meeting the goal as possible.
Yep. So many things to unpack here. I was like grabbing my notebook. Okay, I got to make sure to unpack. And I always love how you can make things so accessible and relatable. And starting with the iPhone, as you're talking about the iPhone being universally designed, it makes so much sense. And I'm thinking the piece that stands out to me here, aside from the beautiful design, and even with the example of The Outsiders and the buffet, is that the learner is at the center, right? And this is where I think always learner-centered, universally designed. So if the learner's at the center, it's not that I have an iPhone and I am making decisions. I'm not sitting with my phone just waiting for the teacher to tell me what to do, right? I have agency. I am deciding, do I want to use voice to text? Do I want to look something up here? Do I want to collaborate with peers on something? Do I want to reach out for help? The iPhone or a universally designed experience that is learner centered is really about the agency of that learner. Same thing with a buffet dinner, right? I'm not going to like experience the chef and just sit here and be there for their great presentation, which is a totally different thing. If I'm there to eat and be nourished and be in community, then I have to take part of that, right? And that's an important piece that we still think of learners sometimes as the passive recipients that just show up, I'll tell you what to do, you can go through and have an experience, and then we'll check it off, rather than flipping it of like, here are my goals, right? You said like clear goals, flexible means, that is by nature requiring the learners to be in and to do something. I always think people ask me, or tell me it's impossible for an educator to personalize for every student. I'll say,
I would agree.
I totally agree too. It is absolutely impossible for whether you have 20 kids or 200 kids, it is impossible. If you are thinking about personalized, universal design for learning, learner-centered, whatever it is, by the teacher having to do all the things, it is impossible, it's not sustainable, and it's not going to work. We have to bring the learners into the process.
And the other thing, I sometimes will tell a story. I have 4 kids, and when they were little, I saw myself as being like the mom who would create the home that like all of my kids would eat like veggie omelets, right? And like I honestly, Katie, I swear, like before I had kids, I thought that I was going to be that mom.
Oh.
And then you make the veggie omelet, and then like if you're lucky, one eats it and everyone else is like, I don't want that. I'm picking out the whatever, I don't like cheese in mine, or I don't like eggs, right? And so then what you generally end up doing when they're little is you start making each of them what they like. Right. So it's like, oh, Aylin, I grilled you a bagel, and Torin, here's your protein smoothie, and, Bowden, here's your Eggo waffles and your raspberry. Right. And you're just exhausted kind of running around the kitchen. And then even when you do that, you'll get it wrong, where it's like, oh, my gosh, Mom, don't you know I don't eat parfait anymore? It's like, well, you literally ate it yesterday. And she's
yesterday.
Like,
because you bought all of the things, now they don't eat it anymore.
Yeah. I don't eat it. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, goodness gracious, make your own breakfast. And so one of the things that I say all the time to teachers is like, you are doing way too much for kids that they are totally capable of doing themselves. And it's like, for me to take the time to give every kid the exact breakfast they want every morning means that my morning is kind of ruined. And for me to take the time to explicitly show them what their options are, to model explicitly, this is how you use a toaster so you don't burn yourself. You do not put a fork into it. Like this is how you heat up something in the microwave. And once they have those skills, like they can make things that you would never imagine, like
Right.
smoothie combinations that I would never come up with, and, making their own little protein shakes. And
Yep.
now I can just, drink my coffee while it's warm and they can do it, themselves.
And they enjoy it, right? Like, and then they know, they have a sense of what they're making, what ingredients. I agree. We have to teach them how to learn. We have to teach them how to cook. And I think in some ways we've gotten away from being a good parent or an educator means that we have to be the ones to do all the things for people instead of helping them do it for themselves.
Yeah.
So, uh, lots of good parallels in parenting and in education. But the world has changed. You wrote UDL now, what do we say, in 2014,
Yeah.
right? Over 10 years ago. It's been rewritten a couple times, three times. In 2014 was or 24 was the last one. So
Yep.
what has changed with UDL over the years? The world has evolved. What are the things that have really changed?
I think I want to talk about two things. One
Okay.
is systems, and the other is technology. So when I learned about UDL, I was thinking about UDL like zoom in UDL. This is just something that teachers are going to do. And then I became an administrator and was like, oh, wait, the reason that I learned how to do this is that I had a system that supported me as an educator so significantly in terms of professional development, in terms of high quality instructional materials, in terms of the time to work with my colleagues and look at data and really think about, is this working? And if so, how do we know so we can keep doing it? And if it's not working, why is it not working? Right. And so when I started learning more about just systems in general, implementation science and improvement science, it led me to learn more about multi-tiered systems of support. And when I talk about MTSS, most educators will relate MTSS with what we used to know about RTI, or response to intervention. So when people think about MTSS, I'll say, what is the first thing that you think of? And most people will say the triangle, right? The continuum of supports on a triangle. You have all kids in tier one, ideally. You have some kids who are going to need more than that in small group, and you have some kids who are going to need even more than that. But that's only the MT part. And if you snap the acronym in half, you end up with this SS part, which is everything we know about implementation science, which essentially is like, what are the drivers in the system that allow us to provide that continuum of supports with integrity? And so we have our competency drivers, our implementation drivers, and our leadership drivers. So your competency drivers are, how are you actually going to build the capacity of every adult working with kids so they feel prepared to meet the needs of this really diverse group of kids, not only academically, but behaviorally and linguistically and socially and emotionally. So the system is responsible for putting these competency drivers in, which include ongoing professional development. I cannot stress the word ongoing enough, that having providers come out once to give a presentation is a great way to kick off professional development, but is wildly inadequate to increase the outcomes of kids. And so it's all about professional learning communities, instructional coaching, instructional rounds, opportunities for common planning, and really working together, observing each other. It's
Yeah.
about educator evaluation systems that improve teaching and are not just focused on a compliance and checking a box, but like the system has to build in all of these different supports. The implementation drivers, that's like the stuff, like the technology, the high quality instructional materials, the assessments. Are they authentic? Are they requiring students to show deeper levels of learning? And then do we have the protocols around our professional learning communities, our data driven, meetings? Like, are those meaningful? Do they allow us to figure out what is working? And then your leadership drivers, that's going to be your staffing, your scheduling, your family and community empowerment and engagement. And it's going to be shared responsibility for all kids, that we do not work in silos. We cannot work in silos. And so for universal design for learning to be effective, first of all kids actually have to be included. And that requires that we have different family and community engagement, because sometimes parents are advocating for separate settings,
Mhm.
because our models of inclusion were not done well. There's nothing magical about moving a kid's seat into a general education classroom if there's not really flexible, accessible materials, if the teacher isn't prepared to design it in a way that is accessible, if that teacher doesn't have time to work with behavior analysts and adjustment counselors and speech and language pathologists. Like, the system wasn't built for teachers to be successful. And if teachers aren't successful, then students aren't learning at high levels. So that's the first change. Is I've done a lot more work with, like, how do we build the systems to support our educators, to support students, instead of let's just have a PD about UDL and then suddenly we're going to make magic. The other is simply just the advances technology, both for students and for teachers. A lot of the accessibility is more built in if we're willing to use the tools, but I've seen a really discouraging swing back to like 1985, where we're not using any of the technology because teachers are so concerned with how students will distract themselves on these tools, that they don't feel like they're engaged in the classroom. They're like, they're on screens all the time outside of school, so I don't want them on screens in the school. And not to say that some of those aren't really valuable insights, but if we do not teach students how to use these tools, we will exclude many kids, and they simply will not be prepared for the reality of the competitive world that we're building. And so I would say that they can be great tools for teachers, but as I see more teachers starting to leverage these tools at the expense of student accessibility and engagement.
That was a lot to unpack. So these two things, I think they're right. The systems piece is huge, and the technology. So I want to go back to the systems. You said the system was not designed for universal design for learning, which, you know, we talk about a lot. The shift to learner centered, shift to this practice is really about these systems and making sure professional learning support. And there's also that clear vision, right? Often when we talk to educators or engaging this work, if we are just getting better at an old system that's an industrial model that's preparing kids to be compliant, preparing kids to just, you know, one step after another and just follow someone's directions and be very standardized, that's a different system and mindset. And really thinking about new and different outcomes, for me, is a really important piece, that we're doing this not just so all kids are in the same classroom and we can say everyone's included. We're doing this so all learners really know who they are, they're able to collaborate, they're engaging in authentic, meaningful experiences. As you said in the beginning, that they have more pathways because they've been part of this experience. They now know that their world is expanded and their opportunities are because they had these amazing learning experiences. And for me, that's a really important distinction around why UDL, why these inclusive practices. It's not just because we want school to be easier and more efficient. It's because we want it to be fundamentally different than it has been in the last 100+ years.
And you know, the thing is even in professional development, like, a lot of professional development is one size fits all, where it's like, you absolutely, as a great facilitator, could meet my needs in a UDL presentation as well as someone who doesn't even know what the acronym stands for yet, but it's allowing me to pursue pathways on my own. Exactly. That's how you meet my needs, is that you say, you know, why don't we start off, we're going to talk about some of the kind of core beliefs and the core principles of the UDL framework. If you're already really familiar with these, here's some things that you might want to try or explore. If you don't have a strong understanding of these yet, you can either explore these resources or you can come over here with me in a small group and I'll walk you through them and really think about what you need. And then ultimately we're going to come back and we'll share kind of what we learned that was new, right? There are so many things that I don't know yet about meeting the needs of all learners, but putting me in a UDL intro where I am watching slides alongside with someone else with no opportunity to personalize, you know, clearly we can see that that wouldn't necessarily be beneficial to all of us. And so a lot of what allows a classroom to be really inclusive is because it shifts to that student-led, that learner-centered, because the teacher cannot provide simultaneous instruction to meet the needs of somebody who has the need for really foundational understanding versus the need for novelty, acceleration, enrichment. You cannot do that simultaneously unless you can clone yourself, which we haven't done yet.
Right. Which is not even the most effective way to learn, right? Like you said, like, I actually get the chance to test something out. So bringing people together, giving them clear goals, multiple pathways, I mean, like, try the thing. So many times teachers leave professional development and they've never had an opportunity to actually practice and understand and go deeper and talk to their colleagues about what that would actually mean for them and what they would have to do differently.
Yeah. Today, actually, I was giving a presentation this morning virtually, and we were talking about the what I would refer to as like it is such a great thing that AI is wildly inadequate at creating lessons, right? I think that that's amazing because, some teachers look at it as, I can just ask this for a great lesson and it will give me a great lesson without being like a really critical consumer of that content, which requires a really significant understanding of evidence-based practices, of what it means to be a resilient learner. And we were talking about how a lot of people will put a prompt into AI and they'll use what they get without having that conversation. And I was saying, okay, everybody, like choose a standard that's coming up and put it into AI and say, give me a lesson, right? And then I was just able to pull apart how not evidence-based everything was that they showed me. I'm like, let's talk about like that option right there is not a deeper learning option. Like the idea is that every single student has to be able to learn this in a really authentic, meaningful way. They have to be assessed, in a way that is like really focused on mastery and competency. And a lot of what is being generated here is like a DOK, depth of knowledge 1 or 2. It is not aligned to the true nature of the standard. We were using a next generation science standard, which was about understanding how the water moves through the different levels of the environment. Most people would call that the water cycle. The next generation science standard doesn't actually say learn the water cycle. It says create a model that demonstrates how water moves throughout the Earth's environment. And yes, that does require that you're thinking about the water cycle, but the generated lesson was like students could write a song about the water cycle. They could write a poem about the water cycle. The standard requires the development of a model to talk specifically about like moving through the geosphere and moving through, right? And like there's a miss there if you're not taking the time to say, what really is it that kids have to know and do? How do I ensure that all of them have, opportunities to engage with grade level learning with really authentic outcomes? And then ultimately, as an educator, how can I start thinking about what types of scaffolds and supports might be necessary in order for students to personalize this? And ultimately, how can then I provide targeted instruction and then small group conferencing? And all of that comes out. And it's like over the course of 10 minutes, we can generate something brilliant that we would not have been able to do by ourselves in hours. But it's not just an automatic, now these tools are going to think for you because they're not very good at doing that, thank goodness.
Well, I think what you highlight is like the expertise of the educator is so important. And people talk about like, is it going to go away? Or, is AI going to replace the educator? And if we are at our best and leveraging what we can do as educators, designing, knowing the standards, knowing our learners, knowing how to universally design these experiences, the technology can help us give us multiple options, help us make connections. I was working with some educators recently, similarly designing experiences based on the outcomes that they had set forth and what was coming up in their lessons. And this teacher said, well, I don't want to use AI because what if it doesn't come up with a good lesson? I'm like, well, then you re-prompt it and you fix it. Like it's not meant to just be like you have to do whatever the robot says. It is meant to be a tool. We are still the ones in charge. We are the thought leaders. They are the ones who are or the technology can support our thinking, but we certainly don't want to be beholden to whatever it says. We want to be leading that. And I think that's exactly what we want to teach learners is how are you, taking the knowledge that you have, leveraging the tools and making it better. And I think that's a really important skill that if our educators don't know how to do this, they aren't playing, they aren't experiencing, then we are not teaching young people to do this. And I think the second thing you said about how UDL is changing is these AI tech-enabled environments. And I too see such a wide range of educators who are skilled and thoughtful and leaning into this and working with students to design their lessons, to help young people use the technology to personalize their own learning. And the ones who are saying, nope, we're banning it, right? And the inequity that's going to create for learners in their ability to leverage the technology and their outputs, to me, is really frightening. that we are going to create a bigger divide of how young people use this technology and what they're able to do as a result.
Yeah. Again, that comes back to the universal experience, which comes back to like the instructional vision that you talked about. Like if a school or district says we create a learner-centered, student-led, universally designed classroom every day, students will have access to firm goals and very flexible means for how they learn and the materials they use and how they work together and how they share what they know. Every student every day has access to deeper learning experiences, really innovative technology solutions. In a blended model, you certainly are going to balance the online and offline. Not to say that every kid is going to spend every minute on a device, but if we say that's the instructional vision, then we need to be evaluating teachers based on that instructional vision. And sometimes there's a real disconnect between what we say we want from our educators and the way that we're evaluating our educators. And they're getting a lot of mixed messages. And that comes back to the systems work, where if you're saying this is non-negotiable for our community, and maybe the way that we're currently evaluating teachers doesn't necessarily honor that, then that's time to get together with your CBA, your collectively bargained unit, and say, how do we create something that's better for you, for students? How do we provide professional development to make sure you understand how to do this? How do we give you the resources to make sure that you know how to do this? And ultimately it comes back to right now, the system is very effective at getting the exact results that it gets. And the results in no way, shape, or form honor how hard people are working. That the nation's report card just came out. We're looking at less than 40% of kids nationwide who are able to meet or exceed grade level standards. That means that the systems aren't even good at meeting the needs of most kids. Right. Most kids are not served by the system. And so we need a different system. And so often we're pointing fingers at educators, which is the most important resource that a district is investing in, but we're not thinking about how are we supporting that educator with a very clear vision for how instruction is changing fundamentally to teach them how to do that. And then to move away from this one size fits all factory model, which we're still replicating in many ways.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing differences in student outcomes. We can predict some kids are going to do well, but more kids are not going to do well. And goodness gracious, what an opportunity to do something different.
I could not agree more. And you said, like, it's not people are working very hard. Educators, even posts, are working harder than ever.
Yes.
And we have to realize we're working harder than ever at the wrong things, right? To your point, if we are not getting the outcomes that we want, people keep saying, well, I have to do this because of the test, or I have to do this because of blah, blah, blah. Like, it is not getting us to those outcomes that we care about. So we have to really start to think, let's figure out the outcomes first, and then let's universally design our systems, our experiences, so that we can make progress towards those outcomes and not continually perpetuate the lack of those over the years. I mean, it drives me crazy as a middle school language arts teacher that our kids, so many of our kids, are not reading with proficiency. And those foundational skills are, so core. It's not the end goal, but those foundational skills are critical for young people to be able to engage in problem solving, critical thinking, doing things that matter. And it's about shifting the instructional practice so we can get there.
What is like heartbreaking to me too is like I have my own beef with standardized testing, of which I really truly believe that the tools that adults can leverage in their professional lives should be used in the life of school, right? We're not preparing students for life. That is their life. Right. And they should learn how to use tools that are accessible. And again, I know that standardized tests could be improved. I believe that strongly. That being said, the biggest reason why kids do not do well on that test is they do not have the grade level knowledge and skills. So it's not that the test is, suddenly, under identifying kids who have this grade level proficiency, as we know that the majority of Americans aren't critical readers. They don't have the foundational reading skills that make them like a really proficient reader when it comes to word recognition. And making the tests more accessible isn't necessarily going to address that because the skills just aren't there. And, I always say, do not teach in a really inaccessible way to prepare kids for an inaccessible test, right? Teach in a really accessible way. And then once students have that knowledge and skills and they can share it in really creative ways and they can leverage all these tools, certainly you can say, like, let's look at is what the transfer would look like. You
Right.
know, when you don't have opportunities to use this voice to text, like how much are you able to accomplish? What's different between when you have these tools available to you and when you don't have these tools
Right.
available to you? Or, you know, unfortunately, you can't just look up and say, I want to use these chat GPT tools in the test. So let's try it without it and see how it goes and reflect and then create some strategies for yourself. Like, but you have to actually have the knowledge and skills first
Right.
before you can start moving towards that generalization and transfer. And a lot of the times we're starting with a transfer of skills that have not been built. Like we're in the wrong place in the zone of proximal development.
Totally. Well, I mean, I've said this for years. Going back to your outsider example, if you're asking every kid in the class to read The Outsiders from a book and answer questions at the end of the chapter, that hasn't worked, right? How many kids are not engaged? And frankly, most of the kids are not even reading the text. In a lot of classrooms, to make it easier, the teacher pushes, plays the book on audio. Kids listen or not, go through, take the test, regurgitate some answers. But if they're not even practicing reading and having the opportunity to read and engage in grade level text, we can't expect them to do well on a test to show their knowledge. To your point, they have not developed those skills, they have not practiced them. And part of the piece is one, developing the skills, and also the motivation and engagement, right? They're so disengaged by the time our kids get from 5th grade to 12th grade. We're losing their motivation and engagement because we haven't asked them to do things that matter to them. So they don't have the skills and the proficiency. They aren't super motivated to take this test. So of course our scores are low. We can flip that, right? By doing things, to your point, where we're creating those opportunities for learners to do meaningful work, engage, and want to develop these skills and be able to demonstrate them in multiple ways.
Yep, I'm with you.
All right. We could go on forever. I
Yeah, we
have
could.
gotten through 2 of my questions, but but that's how it is. Because I mean, I just always love talking to you, hearing the way that you're framing things, and the current thinking on how the world is shifting and how UDL is shifting. So I want to end us with some rapid fire questions, which might
Okay.
be hard because we'll want to go deep
I know,
into
I'm
all of
good. I'm
these.
good at trivia games. Okay, can I do like one word answer or one sentence answers?
You could go one sentence, but
Okay.
we can't do one paragraph.
Okay, got it.
Okay, we have 8 minutes to try and get through.
Okay,
I
got
think
it.
we can do it. What's one thing we should stop doing in education?
One thing.
One thing.
Blaming children for their lack of outcomes.
Ooh. What's one thing we should start doing?
Embracing flexibility and innovation.
Great. Love that. What's something we should keep doing?
Believing that it's possible.
Let's keep believing. You seem to always have a new project, new book coming out. What's something you are focusing on right now? As if there's just one thing.
I don't want to say it because then it has to be true in the universe. Nope, I'm going to do it. I will revise UDL Now 3 to be UDL Forever, 4th version.
I love it. Can't wait. What is one thing that many people might not know about you?
I can run 50-mile races as a ultra marathoner.
That is insane. It is
It
insane.
does explain, like when people actually meet me, they're like, it's not that surprising when we see the level of energy
No,
that you have.
it is certainly not surprising. It is just something I would never even attempt, but it is definitely something that just is so fitting for you. What is a favorite quote or saying that guides your work?
It doesn't even guide the work, but as an
Just
English teacher, you'll feel the love. Ralph Waldo Emerson, transcendentalist poet, wrote an essay called Self-Reliance. And in it, he says the ultimate quote, which embraces intrapersonal variability and how our needs change, because he said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Ooh.
which I love. It's
Love.
like, don't do things just because you've always done them that way. Like,
Yes.
think bigger, try new things.
Oh, I love that. We can get so locked in. Foolish consistency is the
Mhm.
hobgoblin of
Little minds.
little minds. That's good. All
It's
right.
very good.
What are you grateful for right now?
Oh gosh, my kids, my family. Today is my 18th wedding anniversary. I've been
Happy
with my husband.
anniversary.
Thank you for 20 years. And like this morning, we remembered last night. Like, oh my gosh, tomorrow's our anniversary. But this morning we were like, hey kids, like we've been married for 18 years, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's such a long time. And so I am so grateful for the life I have built with him and the children that we have, and our very, very bird-brained yellow lab. Goodness gracious, like I couldn't ever imagine it being better than it is right now.
Awesome. Awesome. Final question. Close us out. What is your hope for the future of education?
That we will get results with kids that equate to the effort that people are putting in, because truly I see that people are working hard. I so many of my closest friends are teachers. I love teachers, and people are just demoralized and exhausted and feel like maybe it's not possible to really change the system or change the outcomes. And so I'm so hopeful that we'll get to a place that we can say, look, when we did it differently, we actually made really significant progress. And that means that there's more teacher balance, that there's closer relationships between families and kids and educators. And ultimately, we want much better outcomes for the kids we're serving.
Yeah. And I think you see this too, that when we do it differently, when we do shift to these more learner-centered, universally designed systems, we do see more joy. We do see more engagement, not just from the kids, but from the educators and the leaders. And so that is the piece that it is possible. We have to keep that hope. It's happening. We just need it to be more ubiquitous for all of our kids.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Katie, always a pleasure. Thank you. Love your energy, love your work, and appreciate all you do for the world of education
Okay,
and all
hopefully
the
we can
kids.
hang out in person soon.
It's time for our girls' trip.
It is time.
All right.